Welcome everybody to NOFA New Jersey's monthly organic open house. The intention of the organic open house is to maintain a space where people who have questions about organic agriculture, organic gardening, how to live a healthy life, how to involve, respect ecology. These things are topics that are of primary importance for NOFA New Jersey. My name is Mike Rassweiler. I'm the owner of North Slope Farm. We host NOFA New Jersey at our farm. And this organic open house is really a cooperative effort to, just try to maintain a space for people who have questions about organic, want to talk about it. And we've got some familiar names, but we also have a special guest today. So I'd like to, Evan, if I could turn it back over to you to introduce our guests. And then after they've made their presentation, we'll open questions and discussion and just go for free-flowing conversation from there.
Absolutely. We're so thrilled to have Kaitlin Farbotnik from NRCS. Kaitlin, you'll have to excuse me. I'm blanking on your official title, but it seems like those titles shift and change every other week.
Yeah, no worries. Technically, my title is Conservation Agronomist and Grazing Specialist.
Awesome. Yeah, we're so thankful to have you with us. And I also sent an email to John Clutie from Clutie Environmental Solutions. So I included John because I'm working through the 823 practice implementation right now, and we just started digging in. But John's a great TSP. He's a huge help. And as much or as little as you'd like to jump in, John, I welcome you. So we can cover all aspects of this new 823 practice, which supports organic farms and farms transitioning to organic. And we're just hoping to have an overview today, kind of free-flowing Q&A. Kaitlin, I'm sure you have something prepared to present, or if not, just something to discuss. So I welcome you to lead us right into 823 if you're able.
Sure, yeah. Let me get my presentation up. Oh, did you disable screen sharing? Or I can email it to you if you want.
Go ahead. It's now enabled.
Okay. All right. There we go. All right. Pull this over. Okay. Can you all see that? Are you seeing the right screen? Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, so if you have any questions, just feel free to interrupt me as I go through this presentation. And I will say that if you've heard about 823 before, it's a pretty difficult standard to meet. The old version was difficult, but we were able to update the standard for this next year, which our fiscal year actually starts in October. So it's only like a week away. So we were able to update it. We worked with the national folks, and there were some folks within state that were just a super help to getting this update made. So the update is a lot easier to meet than the old version of the standard. So if you're not familiar with the old version, I'm going to just start talking about the new version. And then if folks want to see the exact changes from the old version to the new version, I also have, I've got some slides on that too. I can go over what changes were made, but I figure I'll just start with the new version so I don't bore people on all the problems we had with the old one. And I do want to mention, though, if you were planned or contracted under the old version, you'll have to meet the old version of the standard. But anybody that's interested in moving forward with the new version will cover that first. And we're really hoping that the changes we made will make this standard a lot more accessible, a lot easier, and a lot more helpful to folks that might need it. So let me get on in here. All right. So first off, super shout out to these three folks. Couldn't have done this update without them. James and Kimmy, who work for us, but I know that they've worked on a couple organic farms in New Jersey. Everybody loves them. They're amazing people. They're super busy, involved in a whole bunch of things in our agency, and they took the time to help with this update. And then Scott Morgan, who you guys all know, also couldn't have done this without Scott. He met with us a couple times, helped us with the updates, made sure everything made sense for New Jersey and organic producers in New Jersey. So really, without these three folks and their help, we could not have made these changes. So I just want to make sure that they're recognized for all the work that they've put into this, because everybody's really busy. So yeah, again, can't say enough about these three folks. But let me jump into the standard here. So I'm going to walk through the different parts of our standard, and I'm not going to cover all of them, but the most important ones. So first we have the definition, which is, what does the standard do? So this is pretty general. Managing and improving natural resources on land in and adjacent to organic production, using methods which integrate cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that foster cycling of resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity. So that's saying a lot right there, but it also doesn't say too much to know what this is going to be able to let folks do. So I'll kind of cover the requirements and then go over some more specific examples of what exactly we can do through this standard. But some things to keep in mind moving forward, like all of our practices, if anybody works for NRCS, everything that we do, we need to be treated an identified resource concern, right? So we just don't do things because we want to do them, especially if we're in financial assistance programs. NRCS uses, through their financial assistance programs, taxpayer dollars from the Farm Bill. So in order for us to justify spending taxpayer money, we need to show that there's a resource concern on the site and that we're going to treat that resource concern. And the agency has a huge list of resource concerns. I can send this presentation to Devin afterwards if you want to post it, Devin, some more. There's a link here to all of our planning criteria. And but the main thing is to know that if you're interested in working with this standard and NRCS folks, we'll help figure out what resource concerns you might have on the farm, the best practices to treat those resource concerns. So it's not really a document that you need to be too familiar with. It's definitely an NRCS document that our planners need to know inside and out. And the standard, it really acts kind of like a catch-all. We have a lot of practices available to help folks, but we don't have a lot for, I don't want to say we don't have a lot, but there are gaps in our practices and our programs for organic producers. So this standard was developed to kind of fill those gaps in, and not necessarily using other practices that we have, but different methods and techniques where we know there are gaps for organic producers. So with that said, this is not a substitute for existing standards and practices that we have. So if you are working with a planner and you have an erosion problem or you want to increase your soil health, 823 has a place in there, but it might not. If you're trying to improve your soil health and you and your planner decide that the way to go is you want to do cover cropping and like reduce till or maybe some erosion control practices in our vegetative barriers, something like that. Those are the practices that you would plan. You wouldn't necessarily plan 823 just because you're in an organic system, because there wouldn't be a gap there, if that makes sense. Okay. And another thing I wanted to clear up is that this practice can be used by anyone involved with an organic operation. And a lot of the techniques that we see this standard being used for, folks should use whether they're organic or not. But this standard is specific to folks that are involved with organic agriculture. You don't have to be transitioning only. You can be already certified and still have resource concerns. You can also be exempt and have resource concerns that 823 would be able to help you with. So it's not just for transition in folks. And kind of along those same lines is just a reminder that our standards and practices are independent of programs. I know last year there was a lot of confusion between 823. There was a new OTI initiative that was released. 823 was a requirement of the, OTI, the Organic Transition Initiative. It was a national initiative that was released that required 823 to be planned. Sometimes different initiatives and programs require certain practices, but that doesn't mean you have to be in that program to use 823. If you are looking for financial assistance, you might sign up for our livestock fund pool or a soil health fund pool, and 823 could be included in any of those. It's not specific to the Organic Transition Initiative, or the state of New Jersey also has a special fund pool just for organic producers that's separate from the Organic Transition Initiative. So those would be really good places for the practice to land, but it can land really in any fund pool. Okay, let me dive into the purpose of this practice. There's a lot. There's a lot of purposes. There's 8. I won't read them all to you, but I do want you to know that if you have a resource concern, and any of these, really these purposes are like our resource concerns. So if you have a method or a technique that you think would be helpful, or your organic certifier thinks would be helpful, or whoever advisor, mentor you're working with thinks it would be helpful, and it helps treat any of these 8 concerns, then 823 could be an option for you. And some of the purposes have additional criteria. So every purpose has to meet what we call our general criteria, and then some have additional criteria. So the ones here that are in black are the ones that have additional criteria associated with them. And I'll go through the general criteria and that additional criteria right now. I'll go through it right now. All right, so general criteria, very simple, have to follow the NOP standards. We're not going to have an organic standard that doesn't follow the national standards. So that still is, whether you're transitioning or if you're exempt, you should be doing this anyways. So I really don't think that that's a hard ask. And I don't think that's ever going to get changed in this standard. So that is a pretty basic one there. Then we have your erosion on your farm needs to be at tolerable limits. That one could be a little bit trickier. So every soil type, if you're not familiar with T limits, every soil type has a tolerable limit that is in tons per acre per year. That's the unit of the T value. And that is basically saying that your soil can lose between 1 or 5 tons. Every soil is designated a number between 1 and 5. And whatever your soil is designated on your farm, if it's 3, that's saying that you should be able to lose 3 tons per acre per year and still be in a sustainable system. If you lose 5 tons per acre per year on a soil that has a T value of 3, that would mean that you are exceeding how quickly that soil can renew and be sustained. And so it is a requirement that you would have to be at your T value, your tolerable limits. And this is a number that our planners run, or it's a public program. It's not an NRCS specific program. It's called Russell 2. And the reason why we run that program is because if you're not familiar with soil erosion, sheet and rill specifically, 1 ton per acre is, they say it's about as thick as a sheet of copy paper. So it's very hard to detect just by looking at your field how much soil you're actually losing a year. So we use erosion prediction model and software for that. And that number, your T, how many actual tons you're losing per year, gets considered in that software program, or gets calculated through that software program. It considers your tillage, it considers any covers that you put in, any additions by mulch or subtractions if you're like a ball and burlap operation or a sod operation. So it's a very complex software, but a lot of people other than NRCS use it too. It's a very well-known software. But if you're working with a planner, they definitely know how to run Russell 2, or at least they should. If I am good at my job, everybody would know how to run that, and they can help you determine if you are below that limit, at that limit, or above that limit. And if you're above that limit, we can come up with some alternatives to try to help you get below that limit to meet the standard. So some other things that pretty much anybody involved with organic agriculture would be doing already, is you have to have buffers in place for any applicable areas where you might get drift contamination from, another farm. And your crop rotation and that management, tillage, mulch applications, things like that would need to improve or maintain your soil organic matter. And, that's pretty standard for organic standards. So that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. One thing that we would look at is that your nutrients would have to be applied in a manner that's balanced and you're not overloading phosphorus. However, you don't need a full-blown NRCS nutrient management plan because, we talk about our NRCS 590 plans, our nutrient management plans. There's a lot that goes into them. There's a lot of extra nuances. There's like the nitrogen mitigation that needs to happen if it's applicable to your operation. There's a P index that needs to be run, and then there could be further restrictions for that. So that used to be in the standard and we took all of that out. Now you would just need a basic balance and to make sure that you're not over applying phosphorus. And then lastly, you would have to be working with an organic certifier or specialist. And we know that some folks, if you're exempt or transitioning, you might not have a relationship with an organic certifier, and that's okay. As long as you're working with a specialist, a mentor, an advisor, someone that can help you figure out what's going on with your operation and what you can do to fix it. That's really all we would require. Yeah, so that's a big change too right there, because before the standard required everybody to be working with an organic certifier. And we know that that was a limitation that some people just didn't have that relationship. They weren't ready for working with an organic certifier yet. So that was a change that we were happy to see. Okay. Now, if you have livestock, there are some additional requirements as well, but a lot of these come from the organic standards, so they also shouldn't be too much of a surprise. If you have ruminants, they would have to meet 30% of their nutritional requirements from your forages. And, animals and manure need to be managed so there's no crop contamination. That stems from the Food Safety Modernization Act, the FSMA rules. Obviously, we would not want cross-contamination of any products that are being sold for like direct farm to table sort of things. There's a pasture condition score. This is more of an NRCS specific tool, but I do know that other people use it. It's very easy to use the tool. It's kind of like a matrix that has 10 different indicators of your pasture health, and you would have to have a score of 35 or above. And that's not saying you have to start with a score of 35 or above, but after implementation of the standard, you would have to have a score of 35 or above. And the things that are considered in that pasture condition score, it talks about diversity of plants, the number of desirable plants in your pastures. Do you have areas where it's really degraded, overgrazing in some areas, undergrazing in other areas? Like I said, there's 10 different indicators that we would go through. And, producers use this tool too. We do have like in our CSP, folks can use the pasture condition score to help evaluate their own pastures. So it's not a very hard tool to learn how to use. But all of our NRCS people, they know how to do the pasture condition score, so they would do that for you. It's not something you would have to supply to NRCS. And then obviously, minerals need to be and supplements need to be provided. That's kind of a no-brainer. Everybody should be doing that anyways. And then lastly, again, from the organic rules is that your animals have to have access to outside with actual vegetation. So there shouldn't be too many surprises there. All right, the additional criteria. So regardless of what purpose you might be looking at the standard for, those requirements we just went over are for any purpose. And then the additional criteria is just if you're looking at a certain purpose. So if you want to improve your soil health or reduce erosion, then all those general requirements I just talked about, plus these additional ones. That's how our additional criteria works. So some things for soil health and or erosion. And I'll just say, I think erosion and soil health, they go hand in hand. You have to control your erosion in order to improve your soil health, because if you don't have soil there to begin with, you're not going to be able to improve it. No matter what you do, you're not going to be able to improve it if you don't have it. So I always think step one is control your erosion. Then step two, figure out how you're going to increase your soil health from there. But that's just my idea of the ideal world. So, but in the standard, you would have to have a soil condition index above 0.1. So this SCI, the soil condition index, comes from our Russell 2 software. And that software is that same erosion model and prediction software that I talked about a little bit earlier. It's called Russell 2. In that, we get a whole bunch of different metrics that describe what's going on with a particular field and crop rotation, tillage management, all of that stuff. The soil condition index is one metric that we get out of that program. Anything that's above 0 is an indicator that you're trending with a positive soil health or soil organic matter trend. If you're below 0, then that indicates that you are having a decrease in your soil health. It's not really like saying your soil health is at a 0.1, whereas your soil erosion, we can kind of pinpoint you're losing 5.3 tons per acre. The soil condition index is definitely more of a trend. It's not a variable that pinpoints like an exact number. It's to show trends, if that makes sense. I don't know if I said that the right way, but if you have questions, I can talk a little bit more about it. And then your cover, you must utilize to the fullest extent. This could be perennials. It could be using cover crops. It could be using something that doesn't quite qualify as a cover crop. But you would have to have no more of 25% of the growing season being fallow. So that's the growing season. It's not necessarily all year long. That is one thing that is in the standard. I don't know if that's going to be too hard. We had a lot of conversations whether we wanted to keep that in there or not. We thought that would be okay to leave in there. And then obviously, you want to maximize the use of your lagoon end sources. So you're not relying real heavily on outside fertilizer sources, which could also come with an increased level of phosphorus in whatever material you're putting in. So, some materials, they have higher levels of N, some have higher levels of P. A lot of times, unfortunately, organic materials have high P and lower N, and so there's a disconnect there. So they would like to see, if possible, legumes being used for part of that nitrogen balance. And then this one here is kind of a no-brainer. You would have to minimize soil disturbance by tillage, livestock, nutrients, and crop protection material. So if you have a lot of plastic, controlling the erosion coming off of that plastic, things like that. If you're concerned about your soil health and erosion, that's kind of a no-brainer right there. So that's the additional criteria for soil health and reducing erosion. Now, if you are looking at this standard for pest pressures or preventing pesticides to surface and groundwaters, and we use pesticide, that term in our agency is a very general term of really any material that gets put on to treat a pest. So it doesn't have to be synthetic. It can be organic. That term, I know some people hear pesticides and they think that that's only for synthetic, but our agency uses that term very generally as anything that's going to control, the insects, slugs, weeds, anything like that, even fly control, things like that. So if you are interested in using this for that purpose right there, and you have insect problems, then we would be looking at using this practice to help with more cultural practices. So, increase in the habitat or the food of natural, the beneficial insects to be natural predators rather than treating with some sort of chemical, whether it's organic or an approved non-organic chemical for those pests. So beetle banks, things like that, pollinator habitats, trap cropping, companion cropping. Those are all sorts of things that can be used as a cultural practice. Now, if you are applying pesticides, again, they could even be organic pesticides. We do have a software called WinPST that compares the risk to humans and fish of that pesticide, and it looks at the soils. And so it looks at the risk factor and the soil type of that field. And then it gives us this matrix that has high, very high, low, low or moderate risk for a couple different pathways of loss. There's leaching, there's absorption, I think it's in solution with like runoff water. So those are all different pathways that are compared against the pesticides, and then the soils and the risk and where those fall. So we would need to address any high risk or very high risk or even maybe a moderate risk material that you're putting on if you are putting anything on. And that has a huge database of both synthetic and organic materials that are commonly used. So we would have to run that. And if something does come up as a high risk, then we would have to come up with some mitigation for that risk. Okay, if you are looking to plan this to enhance habitat for wildlife, your pollinators or other beneficials, that kind of overlaps with pest pressure, but the definitions are a little bit different. So it kind of gets a little squirrely there, but your planner can help figure out what your actual resource concern is, if you need more habitat or if it's actually a pest pressure resource concern. But anyways, so if that is the purpose you're planning for, you would have to have perennial habitats on 5% of the organic operation. And hopefully that those perennial habitats would be planned for whatever your target wildlife is. And then critical periods for nesting, brood rearing, fawning, etc. You just can't disturb those areas during those times. I would also throw in, you probably wouldn't want to disturb if you are planning for pollinator habitat, you know, not disturb whatever area you plan in for pollinators, or if it was a beetle bank or something like that during critical periods for those insects as well. All right, so that was a lot of information. You're probably just wondering, so what can we do? Like, what are some examples of what we can do? So through this standard, these are some of the major gaps that we have identified that this practice would be good to help with. So something like using your trap crops for pest management or pest mitigation. Again, using companion planting would be a good thing that we could do. Integrated non-ruminant livestock into crop fields for soil health purposes. And I would even throw in maybe integrated ruminant livestock in there. Of course, we definitely have to think about the FSMA rules. But if you have, like, a classic example is an orchard and you want to run chickens in there, there's been tons of research showing that chickens in orchards really increase the productivity of the orchard itself and of the and the soil health. So that would be something that's not covered under any other standard we have. That would be something we would consider more of an organic method or a technique to improve your soil health. So that's an example there. Again, you have to think about FSMA rules, but especially in like nut trees and things like that, some nuts are covered under FSMA, some are not. And it depends on what you're doing with that product as well. And relying on hand pulling as a method for weed control, that is not something that's covered under any other standard. So that could be something, if you do have a weed and you're like, I just can't get ahead of this and I need to hire new people to try to help with just hand pulling these weeds. I've tried everything else. I've tried covers and whatnot. That could be a spot for this standard to help offset some of your operation costs if you're going through financial assistance. To fix that resource concern of whatever that target weed is that you need help with. Using cover crops to provide N requirements. And this is something that's covered under our nutrient management standard, But if you're really concerned about climate change and what is gassing off in your operation, if you're doing it specifically for the purpose of nitrogen volatilization, then that could be a place for this, because that is not covered under our nutrient management standard. So 823 could help you with that. And then things like planting disease-resistant cultivars or grafting can be very common. So if you have a disease or even a pest that you're really struggling with, and you say, you know, I think I really need to look at some different rootstocks, maybe that's something that we could help with 823 as well. So I wanted to talk about some things that we can and cannot do with this standard, because there's been a lot of myths out there. I've heard a lot of things that just aren't right about the standard. But hopefully I kind of did a good job explaining what we can do with the standard, but what the standard is not. Some of the things that I've heard is that, oh, it's more of a capstone practice. You know, you get your organic certification, and you just get this payment to operate organically. And that's really not what this practice is. Everything we do needs to treat a resource concern. Again, if you're working with someone and they decide that, you know, cover crop, no-till, vegetative barriers is what you need, then we would plan those practices. This isn't a substitute for any other practices just because you're doing it organically. There's been some information out there that this standard would pay for workshop registrations, and that's also not correct. Again, we have to treat a resource concern with whatever we do. So, you know, you might go to a workshop and figure out some great ideas on how to treat a resource concern, but that resource concern is still going to be there when you get back from that workshop until you do something about it. So 823 can come in when you do something about it in that phase of the planning process. And then again, we don't pay for just organic certification costs. There are other USDA agencies that can help with that, but it's not a payment to help you actually get your certification paperwork done. It's a standard that can help you meet the different national organic standards to get that certification, or to help you meet those standards if you're exempt, but it will not help you actually pay for the certification costs. Okay, that's what I have on that. I do have another set of slides that just go over the updates, but if you're moving forward or thinking about moving forward with 823, that's the information you need to know right now. And I will say that if you are interested in working with NRCS, our sign-up deadline is coming up on October 18th. So please make sure that you get in contact with your NRCS office and you get signed up for anything that you might want to fix on your farm before October 18th, because that is our sign-up deadline.
Kaitlin,
all right, are there any questions?
Let's definitely stop there to take questions, and I think we've probably got enough to discuss.
Okay.
Although people may have specific questions, you know, anything we can handle.
Yeah. So
we'll just open up the floor. I definitely have a couple questions if nobody else does, but they're just practical stuff. So I'd be interested to open the floor up, and if you have a question, just go ahead and speak it out.
Kaitlin, early on, you had mentioned that there's a lot of flexibility in who can be your advisor. Could you speak a little bit more about that, perhaps?
Yeah, so there's not a lot of folks in NRCS that have a good background in organic. We're trying to train up all of our folks and have them familiar with organic operations. But the standards are very specific, you know, like the national organic standards, and what somebody needs to do is very specific. So, yeah, like I said before, the standard had organic certifier specifically, but it can be a specialist, really anybody that has experience with organic operations and is familiar with the organic standards could be considered. It's not like somebody has to get approval from NRCS to work with a certain person ahead of time, unless they are a totally different track, but unless they are getting an organic transition plan written. then, there's a list of certain folks that can write those plans. But, it could be somebody working with you, John, or, even if Mike, if you're helping somebody, you could be considered an organic specialist, with the knowledge that you have. So it's very open-ended now, who folks can work with.
Kaitlin, a list of folks who can write organic management plans. Can you talk a little bit more about what's the list? How do we find that?
So we do have NRCS. If you're transitioning to organic, you can get what we call an organic transition plan. And I'm going to throw out a lot of acronyms right now, and I'm really sorry about that. But there's the CPA, which is a conservation plan and activity. And that would be somebody coming out, doing all of the evaluations. So if you have pasture, doing that pasture condition score, running the Russell 2, running the WIN-PST, and then talking with you about what they found, what resource concerns exist on your operation. And this is a back and forth with the producer and whoever that planner is too. So it's not just like the planner's coming out and telling the producer all this stuff. Of course, the producer has to have a lot of input and also be very communicative about what their issues are that they're dealing with on their farm and what they want to fix and what their goals are for the future of their farm. But that would be the CPA. And then that CPA is just more of an evaluation, gives a lot of information about the erosion, if there are any pesticides being used, what's the risk of those pesticides, looking at those pastures, really just evaluating, is there enough habitat if that's a concern of the producer, things like that. And then there's another plan called the DIA. It's the Design Implementation Activity. And that's the follow-up to the planning. So that would be then somebody sitting down with their plan writer and talking about, okay, we found all of these problems and these are your goals. And the DIA would identify the practices that then could be planned to fix those problems and help that producer meet their goals. So that is a plan that's available. We also have soil health management plans. We also have nutrient management plans.
I'm sorry, Kaitlin. Yeah. Can I just jump in? Because one of the things I think you're making very clear is that the NRCS has plans for, to really deal with these problems. The question is, how do you access the plans? So you referenced a list of, I guess, certified planners. Is a technical service provider, is that the term you guys use?
Yeah. So we don't actually write those plans. We could write, if somebody had enough experience, an NRCS person could write them. It's more of a time issue for us. So the technical service provider list of folks that can write those plans, I can put the link in there, but if you just Google NRCS technical service provider, I think it's technical service provider registry, that would come up. There's only a couple folks in the state of New Jersey that have been approved to write these plans. Not a lot of people have asked to help with this. So I'll just put a plug in if anybody wants to sign up as a TSP and help with writing these plans. That's something we're looking for too.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to jump on it, because I think it is probably one of the most important topics right now that the industry of organic agriculture has traditionally been poorly served by government support. So that now that we've got all this government support, it's like critical that we are able to support farmers to access it. And what it seems to come down to is that, that you've described a very, thorough analysis, including, understanding how the farm is changing. These are really incredible concepts, but also hard to access, and also maybe a little bit hard for a small farmer to absorb before they actually just go plant cover crops.
Yeah,
which is actually pretty easy to access and understand. So we don't need to dwell on it more, but I think the topic of how does the small farmer access these government resources, is it really at this point even more important than what exactly the resources are? So if you could share that link in the chat, that would be awesome. And I definitely want to encourage all our guests to the open house to share information about, any consulting they do or businesses that they run or their farm, whatever. Share it in the chat so that we get to see who everybody is and people can follow up afterwards.
Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, could I just jump in real quick? So
Yep.
if folks want to get one of those plans written, or they want to work with NRCS and you've never done it before, I'll say the paperwork is a little bit daunting. You have to register your farm with the Farm Service Agency because everything we do is track, farm, and field based. So you would have to get that farm registered. It's a one-time thing. I think my family registered our farm like, oh, it seems like it was like back in the 50s or something, And so it's a one-time thing that you have to do. There is some paperwork. The application to sign up really isn't that bad. With our agency, though, you do have to understand we're a government agency. So we don't even have our allocation yet for the fiscal year, which is in October. So sometimes it's a lot of waiting, and then you'll get a phone call saying like, hey, are you ready to move? That's not the way we like to operate. We like to do our due diligence and give people time to consider their options. But sometimes it does move kind of quickly. So, but it seems like people are kind of afraid to start that paperwork process. And you shouldn't be, because if you have a planner, and I think we've got really good planners in New Jersey right now. I'm very happy with our planners. They can help walk you through all the paperwork, make sure that you're meeting, the October 18th deadline and things like that to get signed up. So I just want folks to know there have been some horror stories out there about signing up. And I hope we've kind of trained up our staff enough that people still aren't having bad experiences with that process.
I'd love to give John a chance to talk a little bit about being a TSP. John, I'm not sure that I've really met you, but I understand that that's what you do. And likewise, I think that Christine from 360 Earthworks acts as a consultant. I don't know if you're on the list or not, but I'd love to hear from both you guys. But John, why don't we hear from you? What do you do as a TSP?
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself. I'm a TSP with NRCS. As a TSP, what I really like about it is that where NRCS really focuses on the program implementation, oftentimes as a TSP, I get to work directly with farmers on providing those technical services to talk directly about the resource concerns, what to do about them, and how to get those accomplished from a technical perspective. And in doing so, I guess in order to do that, I'm registered as a TSP for the transition to organic, also for soil health, for nutrient management plans, and for general conservation planning. And so I kind of cover the whole gamut as far as various different resource concerns that should be considered. I just really appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself. Thanks.
There's questions on both ends of the spectrum that I have for you. One, I'm going to start with the sort of most pressing thing that Kaitlin brought up, which is that the field of becoming a technical service provider for organic farmers is pretty wide open. It seems like there's a big opportunity here, but you do have to have, expertise. And so much so to get qualified as a TSP and recognized by NRCS. Can you talk about how you did that?
Sure. It was not a quick process by any means, and there are kind of different. There are certainly different levels that you also kind of have to work through. So being qualified to be a TSP is one thing, and then demonstrating proficiency in those various different fields is another. And so it does take quite a bit of training. It takes quite a bit of it takes quite a bit of like also being able to demonstrate your ability. Kaitlin, have I missed a few things?
No, I think, yeah, I think you did a good job. I would say that they are working on the TSP process. So before there was, I'll be honest, it was a really horrible, like, software system they use that TSPs had to log into, and it was very, very glitchy. And they've been really trying to work to clean that system up, that database. So I'm hoping, and I think there's a new redo coming out in October. So I know some people were interested in becoming a TSP, and they're just like, I can't get through this, just a software system to do it. And that was very discouraging. So they have been working on trying to make that easier. But if somebody's interested in becoming a TSP, like John said, you do have to demonstrate that you have the knowledge and technical skills to write whatever plan that you're signing up for. So like in John's case, I hope you don't mind me talking about John, but he wanted to sign up for something. He sent in a couple example plans. We review those example plans, say, yes, they look good. No, they don't look good, or yeah, they look good, but we'd like to see a little bit more here, here, and here. And that's from once you get through the database, and we have a wonderful technical service provider coordinator named Bia that works with us, and he's so helpful, such a nice guy. So once you get through kind of the database work, then the next step would be to submit example plans. And then we review those plans and, let you know if they look good or not good, or like we would like to see a little bit more here or there. So I don't know, like I'm hoping that it gets the software gets easier for TSPs to sign up. But I would say if anybody's interested, call Bia or email Bia, and he's can help you through everything that you need to know.
Can you share that?
Yeah.
Email or link in the chat. And then Kaitlin, yeah. I want to be sure I get some questions in here because we're running out of time. And Christine, Virginia, I'll get to you. I just want to give Christine a second to introduce herself, maybe talking about being a TSP, Christine, and how you got there.
I should say an unofficial TSP. I now learned that I have to be very careful with that acronym. And thank you, Kaitlin, for so much information. And it's actually really exciting because I come at it from having worked with NRCS and conservation organizations, being recipients of grants and implementing grants through riparian corridors and meadows. And so I actually have a lot of field experience, but I don't have any certification or qualifications to be a TSP. But I fell into the role 20 years ago, working with private landowners that were not, and farmers and service providers that were not keen on signing up for these types of programs. They actually were like anything but that. I mean, that was a long time ago. But now hearing what you've offered here, it's very exciting to see the evolution of that. You're getting the feedback and things are being refined. So I'm very interested in continuing the conversation offline, because what we are doing really all is the same: protecting, water, soil, plants, animals, and importantly, people in this very small garden state. So I'll definitely do more and learn more. I'm at the other end of what John Clutie does, but at the same time, we're working towards the same destination. So,
Virginia, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I had a question and a comment. So my question first, I want to first thank you, Kaitlin, because you're like masterful at simplifying complex things. And I always find the landscape of NRCS. I always find it, I don't know if it's just me, I find it complicated. So I really, really appreciate your gift in doing that. Thank you. I was wondering, the question I have for you is, how do purposes, you had a list of purposes on a slide, and how do purposes differ from resource concerns?
So they don't really, but the purpose is just phrased in a different way. So if the resource concern is sheet and rill erosion, the purpose might be to reduce erosion or reduce sheet and rill erosion. So there's a very easy linkage between the two. If you look at that resource planning criteria document, which I know you're familiar with, it's very easy to see which purpose goes with which resource concern. And that resource concern planning document, it's a very NRCS-y document. It's kind of like, we call it our Bible of conservation. I hope that doesn't offend anybody, but that is what we refer to it sometimes, because it tells us exactly, you know, if we go out to a farm and we're like, is this an actual resource concern? Is it not a resource concern? It will tell us the criteria of what constitutes a resource concern and not what we have to do to meet it, but what threshold we have to get to meet that. And that's important because, yeah, our agency, we're the fix-it agency. So we have to identify a resource concern in order to help somebody. That's EQIP, which is our biggest program. The CSP program, we can work more in enhancing like somebody's soil health. So if your soil health is already really good and you've already met that resource concern, there's another program that we can help you with to make small tweaks to your operation to make that better, make your soil health better. But it's very programmy, and your planner can help you figure out all of that stuff. Like if you already have a really good farm, then the CSP program might be the way to go. But the biggest allocation of our money is in the EQIP program, which is where we have all of our different fund pools. Organic fund pool, the Organic Transition Initiative is an EQIP program. So I kind of focused on that during the presentation.
Great. All right, my part two, and I'll be quick, I know we're near time, is back to the TSP conversation. So a few years ago when I was finishing my MS in soil science, I was working with some folks in Massachusetts who were looking for a TSP on a farm forestry project. And they were like you said, the list is short, right? The list of providers is short. And that relates directly to how complicated it is to become a TSP. And to John's point, it comes back to you have to have worked for NRCS. And when I was working, who was the previous coordinator before B? It's on the tip of my tongue.
Oh, Nancy? Was that
Nancy.
way back? Nancy?
Yeah. And Nancy was like, no, we'll talk. We're going to figure this out. And we like went through the whole process one day. And she was like, oh my goodness, it's true. You do have to have been an NRCS employee to become the TSP. So that barrier to entry is great, right? And so to me, it could easily be if you know people are willing to work hard, right? Meet the criteria. John's worked very hard, but the path is not really clear. And so I think if it were, and that were then opened up, then to Mike's point, all these great programs would be more widely accessible.
Yeah. Well, it's easy if you worked with NRCS because you already know all the information, but we do have TSPs that have never worked for NRCS.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. I think like the only two TSPs I can think of that have worked for NRCS is John. And then we have a TSP on the engineering side, Linda. We've got tons of other TSPs that have never worked for NRCS. You just have to demonstrate that you understand whatever it is that you're applying to do. And understanding our standards is something that you have to demonstrate because we work through our standards, right? But that's something we can help you with. And if you know how, I kind of feel like if you know how to read the standards and the nuances of them, then you can easily demonstrate, I think, you could easily demonstrate that you understand what you need. Some of the TSPs, there are education requirements. Some of them, there are some agreements that we have, like if you, I'm going to mess this up, but if you're like a crop consultant or a professional soil scientist, you kind of get like grandfathered into some of the TSP requirements too.
So
Thank you.
We're running out of time. Megan, I see you on video. Do you have a question or a comment or anything? Eli, you had I'm sorry.
Yeah, maybe I'm the newest, most beginner level guy here, but we're in the process. We just, I think, started our farm record. So I just trying to confirm, are we on the right path? Because will we come across these again in the near future once we get the farm record established and everything?
Yeah, so if you have already been at Farm Service Agency, FSA, they help establish your records, which sounds like you're doing. You want to make sure that you have an application in if you're interested in financial assistance by October 18th, though. I don't know if you sent one in and that initiated that work with FSA. But if you have not, call your local NRCS office or just ask them to make sure that you have an application in if you're not quite sure.
Yeah, I think we just submitted a form to get the farm record. We have verification from the facility that we're in fact there doing what we're doing. And I think they're trying to, because I'm a veteran as well, I think they said we get the basic crop insurance for free, which I don't even know. I didn't understand how much it was, but it's free. So why not take it? So I'm trying to get signed up for that by the 30th.
Okay.
And I'll have to look into this next thing because I don't know that anybody said anything about it, but.
Yeah, so Farm Service Agency and NRCS, we work together, but we have very different programs. So if you signed up with something with the Farm Service Agency, you would still need to sign up with NRCS for your application.
Okay.
Yeah.
Devin asked to have some space at the end to just put a pitch in for the TOPP program. Devin, if you're queued up, but before I have you sort of take us out, Devin, I just want to say again, Kaitlin, thank you so much for joining the Organic Open House today and sharing this information. And everybody for joining us. The great way to reach out to NOFA New Jersey is just go to nofanewjersey.org to the website, and from there you can follow the pathway to get to things like this and our winter conference, where I got to say, after this discussion and how much more there is to talk about, I feel like I'd love to see a TSP workshop at the NOFA Winter Conference. It would be great to, maybe even be giving credits towards training them, if you participate in the workshop. But so please if you have any more questions or comments, put them in the chat as Devin takes us out. But otherwise, thanks again for joining us. And we'll hear Devin and then we'll say goodbye.
Thanks, Mike. I don't have a ton to add. I'll just echo what you said. Kaitlin, thanks for an awesome presentation, and everybody who attended and joined. We are really, really lucky in Jersey to have a strong NRCS team, and I'm not just trying to fluff your feathers or butter your biscuit. As the state lead for the TOPP program, NOFA New Jersey, we get to interact with our TOPP partners from Maine to West Virginia. And we just got back from a regional meeting where OTI was a major point of discussion. And we have so much more resource than some of these other states who barely have a relationship with NRCS, because NRCS is so disinterested in engaging with OTI and the 823 practice standard that they're trying to find a way in. So we are way ahead of the game. We have 3, I believe, TSPs that are approved to write organic systems plans or organic transition plans. And, we should all just be grateful for that, because it's really a much harder uphill climb elsewhere. And I'll just echo that right now is the best time to get engaged, because we can't say a program doesn't work for us if we don't try and work through it. So I'll echo what you said about James, about Scott, about John. All these people are doing, really good work to try and evolve NRCS's practices, but that can only happen if we engage with it, work through the issues with them, work through the challenges, and influence, hopefully better programs downstream. So I just want to make sure that folks who are interested just jump in, because from my experience, it's been walking the farm, talking to friends, and trying to find ways to translate what seem like very squared away, structured practice standards, finding a way to translate those onto in the field, in the ground practices. And that TSP leverage, that TSP role is so huge in accessing these opportunities. So just a plug to engage everybody, engage, help push what we have as possibly might be the only time we have such tremendous funding to help evolve these programs. So that's all I got. If you want to learn more about TOPP, which is also part of OTI, go to organictransition.org.
Last comments? Christine, I know you had something on your mind.
I'm going back and forth with Martha, who's like, Don't say it. Say it. I do want to go back to it just to give NRCS credit, because if Martha did not start off with NRCS back in 2017 and build a relationship, she went from market gardening to like transitioning crop fields and starting with grazing. So, I mean, we're at that crossroads thanks to NOFA and Operation Diversification funded by Highlands Grant to kind of step outside. NRCS is like, no, that doesn't qualify. Don't do that, you know, with grazing. But thank goodness, you know, for NRCS that got us to this place where we're willing to step outside maybe some of the boxes in the practices for grazing and try these adaptive things with a grant that will be willing to pay for that risk, you know? So just a thank you for that it does, just to back what Devin just said, and we all know.
Yeah, investing in organic agriculture and practices is very available to everybody. NOFA New Jersey can help. NRCS has the, you know, they've codified it and are helping people access and understand it. There's a lot of resources out there. So we, like Devin said, we encourage you to engage, follow your dreams, and more support is just better and better. Thank you all for joining us today.